Hey everybody, welcome to the JonFly channel. Today we have a special guest. He is the founder, owner of Pilotedge, our favorite airline, our air traffic control network. And today we're going to be talking about what's on the screen here. We got the LINDZ8 departure out of Aspen-Pitkin County. So Pilotedge, for those of you who don't know, is an online air traffic control network based in the western United States, and they just recently expanded to cover a lot more of the West: Salt Lake, Denver, Portland, Seattle, Phoenix, Albuquerque, and more. So I encourage you to go to pilotedge.net, get your 2-week free trial, and start enjoying some real fake air traffic control. Anyway, we have Keith here. Keith Smith, go ahead and...
hey, John.
Mr.
JonFly, good morning.
Good morning.
It is early, isn't it?
It's very early.
A tad early. No, I'm happy to be here. This is good stuff. We were hoping to speak after one of your previous flights, I remember, but we never quite got around to it. So when I was watching...
arrival into this airport on the...
yes, that's right.
The special event, yes.
That's right. So then when I saw you fly the LINDZ8 departure, I was motivated to engage with you once more.
I'm glad we've had our schedules meet.
It's good stuff. So if you're... my goal today is to try and run through different ways of approaching briefing the SID, how to maybe simplify things a little bit, a philosophy around situational awareness and planning when you're flying SIDs, and actually that's about it. Not too much more than that. We don't have to make it a 3-hour ordeal.
I was thinking just 2.5.
Yeah, exactly.
But then you got to open in 45 minutes. So.
It turns out I do not.
Oh, we're going to miss you this morning online, huh?
Yeah, I think Mark's is actually going to open, so okay. We're okay. We don't have the time constraint after all.
There we go.
Yeah. All right, ready then?
Ready.
Okay. So I have a few points, and starting out with the briefing phase. One thing that became apparent when I watched it through was that it seemed as though you were looking for Torb, because you flew with Torb data from Twitch, and you were asking him to run you through how to fly the procedure. And I think I'd recommend trying to do it the other way around. You should be running the brief for it, and then he'll correct you if you're misunderstanding a certain part of the procedure. But I think it'll help with your confidence and absorption of the material if you're actually driving the brief.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. Because I remember you saying, "Hey, just tell me what we need to do on this procedure." So it'd be better if you drove it. So doing that, I think you got the highlights of it. This procedure looks difficult, and it can be difficult to fly depending on the mechanisms you choose to use to make the airplane fly over the track it needs to fly. Excuse me, for the track it needs to fly. So the very first thing on a SID is to really just trace your finger. It's similar to flying an approach or a star or a hold. If you cannot trace your finger over the plate, over the path that the plane needs to fly, you have almost no prayer of understanding how the SID is supposed to be flown. So the first thing I would do is say, okay, the plane needs to depart on a heading, hang a lefty, join a course, and then at LINDZ, that's where we branch off to our transitions. So the LINDZ8 departure actually ends at LINDZ unless you happen to be flying one of the transitions. So there is a Grand Junction transition that goes out here. There's, it looks like a Mika transition that goes out there. There's a Kremling transition that goes out there, and there's a Red Table transition that goes out there. So there should be no confusion as to what the lateral path of the ground is going to be. I know that seems like a low value, very obvious step, but just the just telling yourself, yeah, to right turn there, to left turn there, to right turn there, will help you visualize the SID, because a lot of this is about visualization. So that's the first thing I would do is make sure you know where the plane's going to be going. So that looking at this SID, there's just a couple of turns that are made before you're on some positive course guidance from a localizer. So let's look at the very first one. The first one is this turn here at 9,100 feet. So initially off the runway, there is a heading to fly of 343, and you stay on that until you get to 9,100 feet, after which you make a left turn to 273. I noticed you guys were talking about the letter H on the Navigraph charts, saying that it's really cool that they tell you it's a dead reckoning heading as opposed to being based on a course off of a VOR. That is a cool feature of those plates. But at the same time, if you think for a moment on here, there's really no way this could be based on any NAVaids. Looking at this plate just visually, that 343 heading, there's no NAVaid it could be based off on both the first heading and the second heading.
Hey, can we back up just a little bit? Just to go more of a 101 course. When I depart that runway, at what height are you recommending that I turn to that 343? Is it after I leave the runway, or is it a feet above ground?
Any turn, there are no turns that should happen in the IFR environment prior to 400 feet AGL.
Okay. So regardless if I'm over the runway or not.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. I don't think you have to reach at the bare minimum, you need to cross the departure end of the runway at 35 feet AGL, and then upon reaching 400 feet AGL, assuming you're using the minimum climb gradient, you've got to be meeting this climb gradient over here.
Okay.
Of the 465 feet per nautical mile. So if you're climbing out at, say, 180 knots, that's a little fast, but it's a nice round number for now. You need to multiply that number by 3. The 465 times 3, which is 1,200. It's like about 1,400 feet a minute, or 1,350 feet a minute, something like that. Okay. It would be your initial rate of climb. Then you need to, once you get to 400 feet AGL, then you crank the turn to 343.
Okay, good info. Thank you.
Yep. So let's see. Yep. So we're in the climb to 9,100. Then we're doing a left turn to 273. So it's a turn to the right, followed by a very quick turn to the left. And in some cases, you want to kind of back up and get a feel for what the timing of this is going to be. 9,100 sounds like a lot. If you're a flatlander like me, it's like, oh, we got plenty of time. It's going to take a while to get to 9,100 feet. We'll get the gear up, we'll get the flaps up, we'll go through the post-flight, the after takeoff checklist. We'll be well into ordering our first coffee and deciding if we're having the fish, chicken, or the lasagna. And in actual fact, that's not what's going to happen at Aspen. So the field elevation at Aspen, I actually don't have it right in front of me.
70, I think it's right there. Is it 77? Oh, no.
Nope, I may have to go to the
I
plate
got it.
behind. No, get it right here. So 7838,
Yes,
right there from the
okay.
low en route chart. Okay, so we're talking 1,300 feet AGL. Imagine think about how long it takes to get to 1,300 feet AGL. It's like nothing. So in fact, that's during one of the more tricky phases right there, because technically after you get to 1,000 feet in these jets, the first 1,000 feet of the jet climb profile is done at the V2 plus 10 typically, I think, something like that. I'm not a jet guy, but my understanding is during the climb out, that's why you have the V1 and V2 numbers. V2 is used as your initial, it's a reference for your climb out speed. So you might do V2 plus 10 on the climb. Once you get to 1,000 feet AGL, the V2 climb number goes away, and you're now in the acceleration phase. So there's a lot going on in terms of flying the jet here, because just as you're entering the acceleration phase of 1,000 feet AGL, which would be 8,800 feet MSL, well, 300 feet later, you're supposed to be cranking a turn. So that's quite a busy time in the jet. But aside from that acceleration issue, with looking at a right turn, a left turn, both done on dead reckoning, so there's no NAVaids required. The very first NAVaid that is required of the 2 that are used in this procedure is the back course from this localizer over here.
I was going to make a comment. So when you were talking about a lot to do in a very short amount of time, now compound that in a 737, which typically doesn't fly out of Aspen, and having to change from tower to departure, you're you're bringing up the gear. The flaps may stay in place for a moment, but there's so much to
Right.
do, and so I want people to know out there that in a 737 there is quite a lot to do, and that's why I think some people look at this chart and say, "Oh, this is pretty simple." But when you have so many things to do in a finite amount of time, and you normally have 2 people, it's a little bit different.
That is true. That is true. You do need to have your act together to fly at single pilot in a 7.3 for sure. And so what I'd like to convey is we have to understand what the ground track is and how it's flown. Then the question is, how are we going to make the airplane do the things we've just determined? And that's where I think it gets interesting, because attempting to use too much automation, and by automation I mean, for example, the FMS trying to engage LNAV, for example. If you start futzing with LNAV and giving it a try as you're on this leg here on the 273, or even on the 343, for example, if you're an LNAV addict and you try and shove that thing into
tries
LNAV,
to go to red table.
Is that right?
In a lot of situations, it starts to turn right. So
interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
you have to. Now, some people have had different circumstances, but essentially, in the Airbus or the 737, you have to hand fly this.
Right. Which was going to be my recommendation, to be honest, because one thing, you should always be able to hand fly literally anything at least as a real world pilot. There's nothing that the automation should be doing for you that you couldn't have done yourself. Now, certainly the automation can help and reduce workload, but still at a low level, there is no procedure you shouldn't have been able to hand fly, with the possible exception of a Cat 3 auto land. Right, Cat 3 auto land is designed to be automated the entire way, but this should certainly be hand flyable, because it is really nothing more than a series of well-timed turns. So let's finish up these last 2 points on what needs to be done to hit this lateral track, and then we can talk about how to actually ways of actually flying it from the ground up. So let's see, we're on the 273 heading. We're going to join that back course, so we need to make sure this is pre-dialed. But as I think about it, we don't have to worry so much about what we would do in the airplane, because we're going to cover that next anyway. But sort of from a very high level, we're on the heading. We're joining this 303 course outbound. Let me just get my marker back up here. All right. So we've flown the 273. We've joined the localizer back course. And we could talk about the implications of a back course versus a front course. And there's actually a feature of this localizer which is going to be really, really key. I was thinking about this morning. If you don't have 2 CDIs, there's something special about the localizer which makes this situation easier than compared to if it was a regular VOR. Once we hit LINDZ, we then need to crank what is a very tight right-hand turn. Right, this is a 121-degree turn. It's more than 90 degrees. To the 064 course to red table. So any kind of assistance we can get on that turn prediction for this intercept would be good. At the very least, the thing we might want to consider is being a little bit slower here than normal, if separation allows, because our turning radius is going to be kind of large for a 120-degree turn. 121-degree turn, I should say. Okay, so we've got a left, a right, another right, and then, hey presto, we make it to red table, after which you were heading to Blue Mesa, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so Blue Mesa. It's also good to have some essay as to where Blue Mesa is. So we have red table, and Blue Mesa is down here. Okay. So if I were briefing this sit at a high level, that's what I would look at and say, okay, we're cranking a couple of lefts, a couple of rights, and then right after our really ridiculously tight right-hand turn at LINDZ, we had to make yet another ridiculously right-hand turn at red table. And this is 13 miles, which is not that far to go. When you consider that you might be, again, reconfiguring the jet or starting to speed up or dealing with a frequency change to center, you don't want to be letting down your guard and saying, cool, we're in the en route phase, when there's actually a really tight right-hand turn to do prior to red table. This, of course, assumes you don't get a shortcut direct Blue Mesa, which you could also request as a way of not having to deal with such a tight intercept. Okay, so that's the Fire away. What you got?
Okay, well, you'll probably cover it, but just the very first question that comes to mind is, assuming I have the localizer tuned in, I'm doing the 303 outbound. If I will not be able to tell that I'm nearing LINDZ unless I have the red table viewable. So
correct. Yeah. So let's talk about how to fly.
Yeah.
How we would actually fly this in the airplane, right? So if it's okay, I'm going to take it from the ground up, because we're going to end up at that point you just described really, really quickly. But just for the sake of being thorough, we'll talk about what we would actually do in the cockpit. What's the most efficient way now to actually fly this as we visualize doing this? And so I would, unless you have complete confidence in the FMS, I would not really worry about what the FMS depicts for flying this. I'd say, you know what, we're going to fly this manually, at least to LINDZ.
And that's what Torbinator 97 was saying. Okay, you can engage your LNAV at LINDZ and take a chance.
Right.
So
right.
It was and I don't think I ended up doing that, but yeah, hand flying to LINDZ is at a minimum.
Right. Right. But you also don't want to even really be taking a chance, right? You should make sure the FMS, give it something you know it can do. So you know that you could tell it, okay, we're going to go from LINDZ to Red Table to Blue Mesa, and it should presumably draw a line from LINDZ to Red Table to Blue Mesa. And if you can verify that those courses are right, then when the time comes to engage LNAV, it should be good to go, right? If you're at LINDZ, pointed vaguely at Red Table, and you engage, it should have the ability to join the 244 radial inbound to Red Table, right? I'm guessing. But everything prior to LINDZ, between you and I, when I looked at the legs list, it actually looked pretty good. I did see the 273 heading, and I did see a reference to a 303 course to LINDZ. So it looked like it was going to, it understood the basics of the procedure. But it sounds like from your experience, it doesn't fly it right. And honestly, as you're kind of developing your skills, even if it could fly it right, I'd highly recommend that you fly it manually first to really get a feel for this.
I would say that anyone that's watching this video that's considering doing this live, hand fly it all the way to Red Table is what I'd say.
Right.
Or
Correct.
maybe even be on your path to Blue Mesa and then engage.
Correct. And actually, here's the dirty secret of this, is that even if you take the FMS automation out, right, because there's a spectrum of automation from hand flying at the left side all the way to full LNAV VNAV with FMC on the right side, and in the middle we have different autopilot modes, we have flight director, all of those things. If you're a single pilot and you're not 100% comfortable with the operation of some of those middle modes, we're talking about heading select and just regular nav mode to join that localizer, it may be best to leave the flight director off completely and just, honest to God, just fly the plane by hand all the way to Red Table, or very, very close to it. So when we say hand fly it to Red Table, we're literally saying hand fly the plane to Red Table. Don't be trying to fiddle with the autopilot modes, because I've seen people go down that path where they're kind of hand flying, but they're also programming the autopilot as if they're going to use it, yet they're not actually using it. So they have all the workload of programming an autopilot with none of the benefit of it. So just ignore as much of it as you want, and just fly the airplane, because it turns out flying it's not going to be as hard as you think.
Yeah, and I think I was, during the video that you were watching, our live stream, I believe I was in heading mode, and I was using heading mode for those course changes.
Yes. Yeah, it looks like you used the kind of medium level of automation. Now, what was going on with the speed and the vertical stuff? What was managing it? What was managing your speed and vertical profile on the departure? I don't quite recall.
We had an auto throttle set, and I believe that I had dialed in something like 170 knots, something like that.
I see. Okay, gotcha.
But of course, in Toga, I as far as not using automation for the auto throttle, that's probably not a good idea in the IXEG.
I gotcha. Right. So I guess just decide exactly what level of automation you plan to use for that, prior to takeoff, and you'll really put some thought into it. So my instinct would be to go with no automation, but if you're comfortable with the AP, with the auto throttle and the vertical speed modes, if it's going to be faster and less workload for you, then go ahead and do that. However, if you're not sure what some of the buttons do, or if it's going to be slower to react, for example, that turn from 343 to 273, it may be quicker to just fly the plane manually and for that portion, and then once you're on the 273, then engage the heading mode and see how that goes.
I'll give you one example of why it's probably not ideal to use heading mode, autopilot heading mode, is that there was a circumstance where a jet was taking off. They get 400 or 500 feet above the field. They turn to 343. They're about ready to turn to 273. They dial in 273 on the heading mode, on the heading indicator, and all of a sudden the plane starts turning. But what they don't realize is that in the simulator they've changed the bank angle rate, and they're at a minimum bank angle.
Okay.
As opposed to the 20 or 30 degrees that is the standard. In this case, it would probably be, in an airliner, probably 20 degrees, maybe. Anyway,
I'm not sure what they limit it to. It may be maybe 30.
There's a circumstance where if you hit the outer knob instead of the inner knob, you change your rate of turn. That could be very dangerous in this departure if you're not making that turn to 273 quick enough. So again, another argument for hand flying it if possible.
Gotcha. Although I'm not sure if when you hand fly, I see what you're saying. Yeah, if you've set it to an artificially low max bank angle, like 10 degrees or something like that. Gotcha. Yep, that's very true. So the very first time we need any kind of course guidance is going to be from that localizer. So that should be pre-dialed on the ground. So 108.5 should be on the nav radio, and let's start with the default position that we'll have the course set to 303. Right, that's a good position to start with in terms of setting up the nav1 radio. And the mantra when you're flying IFR should always be, where am I going now? Where am I going next? And if possible, what am I doing after that? So thinking about the current leg, the next leg, and having some visibility into the leg beyond that. And the answer for us is going to be, in terms of setting up radios, there's really nothing to do on the 343 versus the 273. There's no radio navigation happening there. The very first time we use it, as I said, is the localizer and then with red table. So we should put the localizer into nav1, and then we can have, if possible, red table in the nav2. This assumes, as you brought up before, this is where we're getting to the point you made, you also need to have two CDIs, or the ability to swap from one CDI to the other. You have to be able to see where you are relative to the localizer and where you are relative to the 244 radial inbound to red table. That's something to practice on the ground prior to takeoff, is understanding the airplane to see if it has two CDIs.
And that's where Torb and I were on the. I was saying to him, okay, I need to have nav2 displayed on the first officer's CDI, or his. I guess they call it the PFD, and we changed it to VOR mode. Well, I haven't figured out yet how to make the IXEG display both nav1 and nav2. It may not be possible in that plane. I'm not sure. But like you say, test it on the ground. If you can't do it, then there's another indicator that is relative that I've got to learn. But again, this goes back to learn your airplane.
Yes.
Know what's there. But let's just assume for a moment that I don't have a way to monitor both. If I'm probably going to be changing the frequency of nav1 when I feel like I'm established on that 303. I'm switching over to and maybe I have red table in the standby on nav1, and I'm just flipping over.
Correct.
And then I'm changing my course.
That is correct. Yes. Now here's where, remember I said there was a feature of the localizer which is going to help us here.
Regardless of the course.
Regardless of the course. That's right. So before we do that, I'm trying to think if we have if DME can help us. Because I remember you guys talking about DME, and you said, hey, does this localizer have DME? And I think Torb said, yeah, I guess. And that's not necessarily the case. So DME is not a given on as part of a localizer. It is a separate feature. So if we actually have a look at IPKN, let's head over and look at IPKN on nav.com. Don't know if you've ever used this feature of Isn't that amazing?
Is it maybe? Yeah, there. Oh,
Doesn't have it, really. So we have a red table, which is a VOR DME. Let me think. I'm going to say there's no DME on that because there's no depiction of DME here, nor is there a DME channel listed in the information over here. Okay, so right here there's no reference to a channel. Notice here there's a channel for the
77, yeah.
Right. Actually, that's for the TAC-N. I'm sorry. That's for a TAC-N channel.
I thought that was just basically a way for some radios to tune in 113.0 as they set it to channel 77, but
right. Now, you're correct, it is, but that's the TAC-N portion. So if you're in a military plane with TAC-N capability, red table is not just a VOR, it's actually a VOR-TAC, which is a VOR TAC-N, and that's the TAC-N frequency is 77. TAC-Ns always have DME. So if you see a channel reference, you know it's going to have DME.
All right. So in this case, Rifle, Grand Junction, Meeker all have DME.
They do. All of them have DME. I'm trying to find an example of just the straight VOR DME. Let me see. I don't think Pitkin has. Sorry, I don't think this localizer has DME. There's no graphic around it which suggests that it has DME. Do you happen to remember if you got any DME off of
I don't.
the localizer?
I'd have to go look at the video.
Okay. Okay, let's assume we don't have DME. If we did have DME, we could do a little bit of pre-flight planning and see how far it is from the localizer to LINDS. To be honest, I'm almost sure there isn't DME because if there was, they would have made a DME reference here for us.
I'm looking at the ILS chart for 3-4 left in Salt Lake City, and under the localizer, it actually has a channel number. So you're right. You're correct.
I see. Okay.
So it's got localizer for the ILS 3-4 left in Salt Lake City, channel 56. And it actually has, I don't know if it has the symbology for it, but it does list the channel. So
yeah, check. You said it was Salt Lake? I'll pull up the plate while we're doing it together.
Yeah, Salt Lake, ILS 3-4 left. So the localizer up there has,
that's channel. Interesting. Yeah, Wasatch. Yeah, Wasatch, same deal.
Yep. But that's the VOR, yep. Is that true? The localizer is at the far end of the runway? Or is that not, that's just pointing to the runway? Isn't the localizer at the beginning of the runway? They're just they're drawing a line from the localizer box over to the far end of the runway, and I think that's probably not depicting where the localizer is.
Correct. You can tell it's not there because of the DME references.
Distance right there. Okay. Yep.
Yeah. The DME on UUH is very, very short. So the DME transmitter is actually pretty close to the arrival end of the runway. Let's see. Okay. So let's assume we don't have DME over at Aspen. So we have this question of if we cannot display both CDIs simultaneously. So we're talking about how to fly the procedure. And if we cannot display both CDIs, what do we do? So you'd think it would be a real hassle to swap back from the localizer to red table, back to the localizer, over to red table, to be monitoring the situation would be really tough because when each time you come back to the localizer, you have to spin in that 303 course, right, for the needle to remain centered. And then, once you verify you're centered, you go back to red table. You have to spin back in 064 and see where you are. That's not really a workable situation. That's a lot of spinning.
Why would you need, once you're established on that 303 and you tune in red table and you're looking for that 064, why would you ever go back to the localizer? You're saying to check it. Why would you do that?
From a legal standpoint, how do you know you're tracking the localizer?
I guess because you haven't changed your heading. But
right. And you're climbing up in the mountains where the winds are aloft. You're climbing through let's say we get told to climb to flight level 210, and we took off at an altitude of 7,800 feet. Do you think the winds are going to be identical I guess a more correct argument is from the time we intercepted the localizer outbound till now, is there a chance the winds have changed?
Yes. Especially with those canyons that are right there.
Correct. So you could have either a change in wind strength or direction.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Now, from a practical standpoint, you're in a fairly fast. Well, the way you're flying it was not that fast. You said you're doing like 190 knots. That's not particularly fast. The faster you go, the less the winds affect your track over the ground. But if we take an extreme case of a barren, climbing out on this, let's say 120 knots indicated, changes in wind will affect. You'll have to crab either a lot more or a lot less to stay on that course. So you shouldn't legally be spending a whole lot of time not receiving guidance from that localizer. So it's really not the case that you swap over to red table and just wait for it to come in. That shouldn't really be what actually happens. What you should be doing is swapping to red table to keep an eye on it, but fairly frequently you got to be coming back to the localizer to make sure you're still on it. That would be the answer you'd give if there was a DPE on board. Is my guess. Ideally, now you said you don't have two CDIs, but
I think you actually do. Sure. So this is probably more applicable to a situation where maybe your second CDI is in op.
Okay,
because I think it's just a matter of becoming familiar with the IXEG or any of these planes, because to me you're going to have two CDIs, but I just want to learn it as if I didn't.
If you didn't, right? Yeah. So if we had two CDIs, the solution's obvious, right? You keep them both tuned as the 064 comes in. You're gonna lead that turn as early as you can. So normally I'd say try and speed up as much as you can, as fast as you can. But here, because we have such a tight intercept, go as slow as ATC will allow you to do to give you a fighting chance. Because if you're, let's say we're in the XL up to 280 indicated, there's no way you're going to make this turn. You're only 13 miles from red table. You've got you've got a 121 degree turn to do. We could go from 303 all the way up to 064. That's going to take you a long time to do that turn. So the slower you're going, the better. And as soon as you see the CDI move, make the turn, life is good. If you don't have that CDI and you're only using one CDI, you said you might have had an RMI. Did you say there's a gauge that you're not sure what it does? Has it got two arrows on it?
Yes.
Yeah, that is an RMI. Those are awesome. So you will want to learn that RMI. It's a beautiful, beautiful instrument. It points at the VOR. Its job is to point at the VOR. So if you're on a 303 heading, it basically has a little hint. Does it have sort of a heading indicator? Is it moving around at all?
I'll have to take a look at it, but I believe it's 2 needles.
Right, but the back of the instrument, does it?
I don't recall. I'll have to take a look at it.
Gotcha. Definitely play with RMIs, and it will effectively tell you when you're getting close to that radial. Not only will it tell you when you're on the 064, it'll tell you what radial you're on right now. And so if you keep an eye on where the head of the arrow is relative to that 064 number, as you see it getting closer and closer, you can see it and go, okay, right now it's at 035, now it's at 040. Basically, you're getting life out of the RMI all the time, whereas on a CDI, when a CDI is fully deflected, you have no idea.
I think that picture that I just sent you is an RMI, so people know what we're talking about, but I think that's an RMI. Oop, did that take you to a video?
It's a YouTube. Yeah. Oh. That's an RMI right there, yes.
Okay.
Perfect. Yeah. So in that state that it's in right there, it's telling you both VORs that you've tuned are at your 3 o'clock.
Okay.
So in our case, we're going to wait until, it would be like 120 degree reference. But I need to remind myself with RMIs whether that compass card is fixed or not, whether it just stays on 360. I think that's only for an ADF. Now this would be showing a heading of 300, and the needles would initially be facing north, and then as red table gets further and further on our right, passing off our right wing, those needles are going to go through 360, 030, 040, 050, 060, and as they're getting to that area, then the CDI would come to life. But we would have known that CDI was about to come to life because we see it happening on the RMI first. That's why RMIs are so amazing. Yes, so you can actually predict when your needle's going to come to life. Because once a needle's fully deflected on a CDI, it's kind of useless to you, right? You don't know by how much more it's trying to deflect, if that makes sense. Okay. You don't know when it's about to come to life. But okay, so we've covered our case where you've got two CDIs. We've covered the case where you can use an RMI to predict it. But if you didn't even have that, if you're just flying this with a single VOR, I would stay on the localizer. That's the first goal, is to just get established on the localizer. Life is good. Work out what your heading is that you need to fly right now to be established on the localizer. Hopefully that'll be good, at least for the next minute or so. Then swap to red table. You've got red table on the standby. And so you swap to that. You twist to 064 and go, okay, we're fully deflected. There's nothing, it's not time to turn yet. Let's go back to the localizer. When you swap back to using the localizer 108.5, you do not have to swap your CDI back to 303. Mm-hmm. And that can save you some workload. And most people, I think, are not aware of that. They're so used to setting the course when you're tracking a course, which is very good practice. But in this one case, you don't have to keep swapping back from 303 to 064. That's because a localizer is a one-trick pony. It only knows how to send the signal for that 303 course. So VOR is a variable, so you do need to twist in 064 to see where you are relative to that. But even then, once you swap back to using the localizer, you can keep that course indicator on 064, and it doesn't matter what you've got it set to. The needle will deflect left or right based on where you are relative to the localizer itself. So long story short, you can be tracking the localizer perfectly even though your course is set to 064. And normally I'd recommend against doing that, but in this particular case where you're in this kind of ghetto barren with only the one CDI and no RMI, that's what I would do. So come back and verify, yep, still on the localizer, and then not long later, okay, let's see how we're doing with red table again. So you're basically flicking back and forth between the two and looking for, as soon as you see life out of the VOR when it's set to 064, it's time to think about starting to do the turn.
Okay. That's a good point, because sometimes I think, okay, I need to wait till it's centered. Well, no, it's coming in quick. Make your turn.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. If you wait till you're centered, you're done, because you have 120 degrees of turn to do.
But if you're just doing, if you're setting a course on a VOR and you have it in nav mode, it's wait until it's centered to make the turn, the autopilot, isn't it? Yeah.
No, it isn't. It'll start the turn.
It'll start the turn. Okay.
Yeah, it'll try its best. Okay. Whether you trust it to do the intercept itself, I'm not entirely sure. To maximize your chance of not overflying here, I would keep the speed down if you can, which you did, but I'm not sure if it was an instinctive decision to do that. Normally, you would fly the profile, as I said. Once you get to 1,000 feet AGL, you're supposed to be cleaning up the jet and starting the acceleration phase up to 250. And then once you get through 10,000 feet, then you're climbing up at more like 270, 280 in most jets. That's a standard climb profile. You would normally not be flying at 190 knots up at 15,000 feet in the climb. The deck angle is really high. It's not the most efficient way to fly it. But in this one case, having the speed down would really be a help for you. Now, ATC might have a bit of a fright if you fly the whole thing at 190 knots. You don't have to tell them necessarily that you're going to fly it slower because they haven't given you a speed restriction. But if there's someone behind you in a jet, chances are you're going to get a speed restriction. They might say, maintain 280 knots in the climb. And if you want, you could tell them unable and say, hey, we've got a really tight turn coming up, and we don't have good course prediction equipment or whatever, and we're not going to be able to do 280. We need to do, we need 250 or 240 or 210 or whatever it is you want to climb out. So tell them what you want to do, and it'll become ATC's problem if you're really not comfortable doing it. So I'm actually dying to try this myself. I'm probably going to jump in the 737-200 because I'm more familiar with that, and fly this both at 190, 250, and 280 and see what that intercept is like, to see how easy or hard it is.
Yeah, after all of this discussion, what's going to be really fun is going in and off network, just seeing how these different scenarios play out, and then go back onto the network. But
Yes.
right after our discussion,
Yes.
I want to go fly it, and I want to also learn to see if I can get that second a different CDI displayed, or
Yes,
learn the
the
RMI.
CDI or the RMI. Yeah, the
Yeah.
RMI is really a lot of fun. It really, really is. You'll fall in love with that gauge once you understand exactly what it does. But it's so simple in its operation. It just points at the VOR. That's all it does. There's nothing to twist or turn on it. It's always just pointing at the VOR. Did you ever play with NDBs?
Mm-mm.
No. Okay, gotcha. They're going away, which is why most people don't really know. Most people who are just getting into flying now or in the last year or two don't even know what an NDB is, because they're going away. But that's how they worked. It's a non-directional beacon. There was no course to tune or twist. There was no CDI. The arrow just pointed at the station, period. And you overlaid that on a gauge to show what the bearing was to it, and from that you could work out what the course was. So if you've ever flown with an NDB, RMIs are super easy to use. But if you have not, then they take a bit of getting used to. But it's perfect for this case. And I have to applaud your thinking. The idea of doing this off the network. You might think that I would jump in and say, no, you should do every flight on Pilotedge. That's not true. As much as we'd love to see you doing it, you're no longer interested, right? When you're in that mindset where you want to practice this, you're no longer doing an end-to-end flight where you want full realistic immersion and interesting workload things and a dynamic environment. That's actually not what you're looking for when you're practicing this. You just want to practice this procedure several times over and over, and you want to try a couple of different variables. That's the beauty of a simulator, and that's where you swap from an end-to-end flight that's realistic to you're practicing a particular task or procedure. And in those cases, I'm 100% for doing it offline. Yeah. There's no value that would be coming from the network at that point. In fact, it would be in your way.
Yeah, and then there's two different definitions of offline. You can be off of the Pilotedge, but you happen to be in front of 150 stream viewers.
Right. Now that I would stream. I would stream.
There's a double offline where you just kind of
right. No, but I think that would make for a great stream to see your improvement. Right. So okay, this time we're going to do this. Now we're going to do it with this, and see how much easier it gets over time. And then as soon as you do this, I would challenge you to find another procedure. So find another SID that. Let's see. Have you flown the Van Nuys SID out of Burbank yet?
I may have in the past in a Cessna or smaller plane, but I don't think I have.
That would be my challenge to you next, is to do Burbank to. I hate to say Vegas because I know you're probably sick of flying into Vegas. So go ahead and make it Salt Lake. So if you want to give yourself that treat.
Isn't that the I-5?
It is the I-5. Yeah. Burbank to Vegas is the I-5.
Yeah.
Did you do the I-5?
I did the I-5, yep.
In a what?
I believe I was in the TBM 850.
In
fact, it's one of my more popular YouTube videos for some reason.
Aha.
Do
you know if you were FMS'd for that one, or were you? Did it just load the whole procedure and it kind of flew the whole thing, or what? Do you remember how it was flown?
I don't. It's probably 8 or 9 months ago. I'm gonna have to go back and review what I did. I probably flew the new suffix called slant JonFly, which is /slant ForeFlight.
Oh no!
With georeferencing, I don't know. I can't recall what I did, but as far as I know, the Carenado, the G1000s that are simulated at present time do not simulate procedures. So it could have been a heading mode situation because you can't fly procedures. Now in X-Plane 11, my understanding is they've implemented a lot of the departure procedures into the GNS 430 and 530. So
right, they have.
That's kind of a nice thing to have.
That's true. That is true.
But I will revisit. Van Nuys.
Gotcha. Or you could try a different transition on this one. You could try the Kremling transition on this, which is just slightly different. It's not as big a turn, right? It's you're going to a 016 course out of LINDZ instead of the 064 course out of LINDZ.
Okay.
So it's a little bit of variation, but do you see how? And when you watch the replays back, that this would also be the best use of the sim too. When you view the flight back in the replay, look for these key points. So, okay, when did I start the turn to 343? That's debriefing point 1. Debriefing point 2 is when did I start the turn to 273? Was it at 9,100 feet, or was I saturated with something else and I ended up not starting my turn till 9,500 feet? So see if you're hitting those points, and then how did I do on my intercept? Because this was the other thing that struck me from the video. So moving on to one of the other debriefing points, you didn't have a lot of situational awareness, from what I could recall, as to where you were relative to that 303 course. I remember you dialing it in after takeoff somehow. I saw you swapping to the CDI, and then I saw you twisting something in. And I remember thinking, why wasn't that set on the ground? Why are we in the air in this really busy portion of flight suddenly attempting to get the CDI working? And then the indication that actually came up showed that you had passed through the localizer already. So by the time you checked for the localizer, you'd gone through it, and it wasn't immediately obvious to you that that's what had happened, that you had gone through it. Okay. But once you did, Torb said you got to turn right, and you were asking, okay, what heading should I turn to? Should I just go to 303? There was it sounded not quite panicky, but not too far off.
Yeah.
From like, I just don't know what to do now. So there was not a lot of situational awareness as to where you were and then how to fix that situation.
I just posted the PE aware track. Check that out.
Okay. Yeah, let's pull it up. Okay, right. It's hard without the fixes to know exactly. We'd have to compare it with. Do you have Torb's?
I think I can find his. Hold on a second. He would be. Yeah. Okay, it's bringing it up. I mean, you can kind of see where I take off 343, a little bit of a turn, and then I'm. It's kind of funny. It's cool. All right, here is Torb's. You gonna bring it side by side?
Well, what I'm looking for is the 343.
Okay, right there's Torb's.
Yeah. You might. You know what? These are only a minute apart. So before we try and pull this flight apart too much detail, you're not going to see some of the subtle elements of this
because it's not recording every.
Yeah, they're only 60 seconds apart. Yeah, they're 60 seconds apart.
Yeah.
Okay, let me open this up. So this is Torb's, and we'll see if we can compare the two.
And he was in the 732.
Gotcha. So let me do both. Oh, come on, Windows. Stop being so helpful. There we go. Okay, so on the left, the Torb. On the right, all right, give me a moment to set that up. It's coming together. It's going to be epic. Can just feel it.
Now, I'm wondering, does Project Fly pull at the same rate? They do, don't they?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not sure what that data rate is. I suspect it's got to be higher than this. SimBuddy would be another good tool to use. I know Kat uses SimBuddy, and when I look at his flight tracks that he occasionally pulls up, the curves look very smooth, which tells me that they are pulling at a much higher rate. But there does seem to be a difference between these. So
now,
Torb's on the left.
I could have got a vector at some point to Blue Mesa, maybe, but don't know.
Yes. So that's right. The point that I'm referring to, though, is down here. You went much further west before doing the right turn. He made his turn to the northwest sooner than you did, I think. Let's see. Aljabal.
Oh, I'm on the right, and
he's
on the left.
Yeah, I'm trying to compare the two. Basalt. Yeah, so just, yeah, you can see the difference here is actually at Snowmass. All right, I found where the difference is. Hold on. So run my screen marker. So here's where I'd like to draw your attention. So, oh, no, it's not letting me draw there. 1 second. Oh, here we go. Getting the hang of this. Right there. And right there. So if you see Snowmass, that Snowmass reference, look directly southwest of it. That's the dog leg. That's where he joined the localizer outbound, I believe. And in your case, if you look southwest of Snowmass, there's no joining of the localizer that occurs. You continue much further west. So you end up south and west of the course. I can't tell what the scale is, but it doesn't really matter so much. There was a procedural error. You know, how big the deviation was, I don't really recall. Actually, I was controlling at the time. I remember seeing you further south than him, but it wasn't by a giant amount, to be honest. So it's not that it got the attention of ATC per se, but from a procedural standpoint, it wasn't a sound approach to flying the SID. Do you recall if you had you must have had it tuned, because I don't remember you saying in the air, now let's tune the localizer. You definitely had it tuned on the ground, but what was going on with the CDI at takeoff?
I think, to be frank, I was using just the heading mode. So once I got to 9100, I was flying 273, but I did not tune in the localizer because I think I wanted red table ready to go. And as you can see, if we look at those PE aware tracks, my turn at Linz was awesome.
I see. You're on the left, right?
Yeah, so we both, Torb and I both turned north near Carbondale.
Right.
And then made our track over. But I think I did not have the localizer tuned in.
Okay. That's odd because you briefed it. I heard you briefing on the ground that we're going to need the localizer and 108.5, like you had it tuned, no?
Yeah, maybe I did. Maybe I was, and then I got to go back and look at the tapes. But
I see. But are you comfortable now that you absolutely have to have the localizer tuned?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
This is
now that I know that I have the RMI available. Oh yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
But even without an RMI, there's because you have no idea when to turn to 303 otherwise.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So that was one point, was that it didn't seem like you were prepared to join the localizer. Once you eventually got that brought up, you saw that the needle was deflected to the right. I think Torb had to say, "Oh no, you've already gone through it. You need to turn right." So at this point, your plane is over here somewhere, right? You're on this side because the needle is on the right. And then you said, "Should I just fly a 303 heading?" Right, 303 would have paralleled the course.
And so in my mind, I'm thinking I'm closer to that 303 than what I actually was. So yeah.
Right, but the needle, the localizer was fully deflected to the right. So you had no way of knowing how far off the localizer you were. It was not good though, right? A full deflection of a needle. It could be terrible or it could be worse than terrible. Those are the only two options if it's full deflection. Because full deflection, but only just barely full deflection, is fixable, but it's a bad situation to be in. Something has gone wrong if you're at full deflection. In this case, so the instinct should be, okay, if I'm on the wrong side of this, the instinct should be to get back to it. So like a 350, a 360 heading, a 340 heading, not parallel. 303 would only parallel. But I could see why you'd think that if you were right next to it, right? If you're here, then 303 you might get away with. It's a little sloppy, but it's more understandable. But if you're at full deflection, it could be bad.
And I was unaware of how far. I was not aware of where my aircraft was.
Gotcha. So trust the needle on that one.
Yeah,
so if it's full deflection, it means it's bad. Yeah. So try and fix that. That was the only other. I think that was the only thing I had. Let me see and go through my list. Speed management of the climb. So just I think understanding a jet climb profile would be helpful. Now, in your case, it helped. As I said, being slow at Linz is actually a good thing on this procedure. But generally speaking, you want to be in the acceleration phase after you get to 1,000 feet AGL. So the 100, the V2 plus 10 number is used just for the initial climb for obstacle clearance. And then after that, you're in the acceleration phase. That said, you do need to be aware of the climb gradient. This is where the planning gets interesting in this jet. even though you need to accelerate, while you're accelerating, you still have to be able to meet this puppy. Right? So if you're going to be climbing out at, say, if we do accelerate to 240 knots, for example, that is 4 nautical miles per minute. So you need to multiply the 465 by 4, which gets us closer to 1,600, 8,420 feet, the 1,800 feet per minute. 1,800? 160, it's 4 times 4, 1,600 plus another... I'm just going to get the calculator out, John. That's just the best way to do this. 465 times 4. Any predictions? 1,860. I did have the 1,800 number right. Okay, so you've got to be doing at least 1,860 feet a minute up to 10,000 feet to get your for terrain clearance. So if during your acceleration phase you slam the nose down and level off to accelerate from, say, your 190 knots up to 250, you may not end up meeting the climb gradient, and you could meet with granite. So another way to fly this, honestly, would be to do it in low vis. So do it with a ceiling, a low ceiling and low vis, so that you don't have the terrain reference. And now you know there's terrain out there, but now you can't see it. And that should put a fear in you. Like, how do I know if I'm clearing the terrain? The only thing that's going to tell you if you're going to clear the terrain is if you meet the climb gradient of the SID. So SIDs, that's the other thing that SIDs do. Not only are they efficient for traffic, and ATC loves them and all of that, they provide you with terrain separation. And that's, who cares when you're in Kansas City? But in the Rockies, you care a great deal. So this SID will keep you alive if you make the turns, but only if you make the turns and comply with the climb gradient. So it's really, really easy to brush this off. I don't see pilots brief this very often. They read out the number, but I don't see them actually do anything with the number. And in this case, we've got to make sure we can hit that number.
I'll be honest, I've never even taken the takeoff minimums into consideration until now.
There you go.
And this is the aha moment.
Gotcha. Yes. Because if you took an extremely slow, let's take a case where you fly the jet at 250 knots right off the deck and you climb at 500 feet per minute, because 500 feet per minute is the minimum climb, right? You're always expected to climb at least 500 feet per minute. That's the number that everyone knows. And then when you get to 10,000 feet, you accelerate to 340 because you're really cool and you like to go fast. Well, your effective climb gradient is crap. The number of feet that you're climbing per nautical mile is going to be pitiful. And so again, try that same situation with zero vis, and then just listen for the boom as you hit the mountain. So of course, no one's actually going to fly it like that, but it shows the extreme case where this again is a spectrum. If you climb too slowly, you can die, even if you're flying the lateral track of the SID correctly. So lateral and vertical are important. So yeah, think about the speed management in the jet and see if you can hit that climb profile. So to actually pay some mind to when we're going to accelerate and what that acceleration looks like. Because I'm not sure at the moment how you fly the jet in terms of when you begin to accelerate it. But from at least the little I saw, it would have been a little late. If you were flying a traditional profile, it was a little late to begin the speed up.
And I'm going to go back and look at the video, and in my practice sessions, I'm going to reference the vertical speed, obviously, because I need to be near 2,000 feet per minute.
You do. Now, I know I rushed through that kind of quick. Are you comfortable with converting that 465 feet per nautical mile into a feet per minute reference?
I would say no.
Okay, gotcha. So let's do that. That's a really important skill that I don't think is that well understood. So to go from feet per nautical mile into feet per minute, you need to know how many nautical miles per minute you are doing, if that makes sense. So if you're doing 120 knots, actually, let's start with something very, very simple. You're doing 60 knots. 60 knots. You're in a Cessna 152 climbing out. How many miles are you doing every minute?
That I don't know.
It's a nice, easy one. If there are 60 minutes in an hour and you're doing 60 miles per hour, that means every mile you're doing exactly 1 minute. So every minute you're doing exactly 1 mile. Right? So you're doing a mile a minute if you're doing 60 knots.
Yeah.
So what happens if you're doing 120 knots? That's twice as fast, right?
So 2 miles a minute?
2 miles a minute. You can always, all you have to do is divide by 60, right? You take the number and divide it by 60. It's 2. Somewhere in the middle, these are, I actually like these numbers a lot because once you memorize them, whether you're doing 60 or 70 or 65 or 55, you're close enough to 60, which will allow you to do this in your head as opposed to using a calculator. But so the key numbers for me are 60, 90, which is halfway between 60 and 120. So if 60 is 1 mile a minute and 120 is 2 miles a minute, 90 is going to be smack in the middle of those. That's going to be 1.5 miles per minute. Whatever that miles per minute number is, you then multiply it by the climb gradient. So let's not do the fractional one. Let's take our jet, which let's say we're going to average 240. There's a reason I picked 240, not 250, because if you've already done the quick math ahead to divide by 60,
divide by
it's going to be 4.
Yeah.
Yep. Now all we do is multiply it by 465. That is your feet per minute that you need to see out of your VSI to maintain that climb gradient. Now, 1860 is kind of low, right? You know from personal experience that the jet's going to climb out at 2.5, 3, 3,500 feet per minute pretty easily. So that's great. So I'm not arguing that you need to adjust your VSI to 1860. You just need to beat that number. That's all. So as you're doing the acceleration, just keep an eye on what your minimum climb rate should be, and if you see it below that for any length of time.
Take me through that calculation one more time to get to the 1860. Sure. So that is
absolutely. Yes. So we need to work out how many miles per minute we are going to be doing. And so if you say we're going to be
240 knots. Yep.
Yep. If we're going to climb at 240, we divide that number by 60, right? Because 240 knots is nautical miles per hour. So if we take the hour and divide it into 60 minutes, that'll give us our nautical miles per minute, or miles per minute. So we are doing 4 miles a minute. Now we just need to multiply that by the 465. Because we are doing 4 miles every minute, and we're supposed to climb 465 feet every single mile. So if we're going to be doing 4 miles in that minute, that's why.
So in a 152,
yes,
it's
a 1-to-1.
It's a 1-to-1. It's gonna
exactly.
Okay. It's going to.
Which is why that's why I like these round numbers. If you're going to climb at 120-ish, so we're looking at maybe at a Bonanza, for example. A Bonanza might do 140, but it's close enough to 120 for me to be kind of okay with it. So the key numbers for me are 60, 120, 180, and 240. Right, that's 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles, and 4 miles per minute. And if you want to use the halfway points on each of those, you can. You just keep adding 30 knots. So I'll build a quick table for you that might help. I know I'm just talking a lot.
Am I thinking this correctly? If I'm doing 120 knots in the the Carenado Caravan 208, I'm doing 120. I need to be doing close to 900 feet per minute.
Exactly. You just double it.
Okay.
That's right. So these are the ratios. These ratios are so helpful to know in so many different aspects of IFR flying.
Just 60 and multiples of 60. Yeah.
60, and then the fractions too, because I happen to use 150 a lot in my Lancer for climb out. I know I'm going to do 2.5 miles a minute during a climb out. So for me, I'm multiplying these numbers by 2.5 because I can't climb at 180, and I sure as hell don't want to climb at 120 because I'll catch fire.
So you're going
with the heating.
You're going. Oh yeah.
I would need to do this, and I actually couldn't do that. I would not be able to meet the climb restriction on this. So my Lancer is not coming out of Aspen anytime soon. Not unless I can fix the cooling.
You need like 1162 feet per minute.
Yeah, at 150 knots.
And this density
I think it'd be just under. Exactly. Yeah, up to 10,000. Exactly. It's not going to happen. That's right. So these numbers are really, really cool to have. So if you can get these ratios in your head, the ones I remember are these. Like I remember the whole numbers. So 60, 120, 180, and 240. And then you just go up or down by 30 knots to give you the fractional amount. So 172, 90 knots is a great climb out speed. So you need to multiply that by 1.5. So what speed would we need? How many feet per minute would we need out of a 172 up to 10,000 feet?
Well, yeah. So you're going to need.
What's the
465, 230, 690, 700 feet per minute, probably. 6.
Let's see. What math did you do?
I'm just quickly doing. Yeah.
465 times what?
I'm saying 1.5.
Exactly. Yep, that's what I was looking for. Yeah, there you go. And you can, because you don't have a calculator in the airplane, you could just do some rounding.
Mm-hmm.
You could say, I'm not going to use 465. I'll use 500. So what's 1.5 times 500? It's 500 plus 50%. 50% of 500 is 250. All right, I need to do 750 feet per minute.
So essentially, if I'm fully loaded, I have 4 passengers, full fuel. I'm not taking a 172 out of Aspen.
Correct. Because you're not going to be able to do 750
per minute
up to 10,000 feet. Yep. That's right. And now, what if you had a tailwind? Mm-hmm. What if the winds are out of the southwest during this procedure, southwest is not so bad. The southeast, if it's a southeasterly wind condition, because remember, it's not your speed through the air that actually matters. Your climb gradient is really ground speed based. So if you get a honking tailwind, you're screwed, because you thought you were going to do 90 knots over the ground. Now you're suddenly doing 150 in your 172 because you've got the 60, 70 knot tailwind coming from the southeast or from the south. Now you need a climb rate of 465 times 2.5. Sorry. Now you need nearly 1,200 feet a minute. Right. So you planned for doing it at 792 feet per minute. You're like, you know what? I've got this. I'm not at max gross. I've got the 180 horsepower conversion. I got power flow exhaust. I'm super light. I'm only going up to Eagle or Centennial. I only need 10 gallons of gas. I'm super light. I can do 800 feet a minute. And then you hit the wind and you're an IMC and you die because you calculated it based on indicated airspeed, not what your speed over the ground was. So that's the other part of it to allow for, is that it's the speed over the ground that determines your climb gradient.
Fascinating stuff. What's going to be really cool is in just less than a couple of weeks, we'll be in the real world, and we'll be flying IFR in a Cirrus 22 Turbo, and you can guarantee that even though I may be in the desert in some situations, I'm going to be looking at the takeoff minimums.
Yes.
Now that I know what the hell they mean.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, out of places like John Wayne and LAX, there just isn't much terrain out there. Well, there's stuff to the northeast of John Wayne, but honestly, it's so far away when you're departing south. It's going to be tough to have a problem with it. Same with LAX. But when you get to places like Ontario, Vegas, I'm guessing Denver has some issues. I can't wait to fly to Eagle. I want to see what procedures there are out of Eagle. But some of these non-towered fields, it's going to be great.
You bring up a good point. Some people will be watching this video over the next week here in early 2017. That is your next bonus field, right? Rotating field? Is
That's exactly right. Okay. And look at you. I think we've just found a procedure for you to fly.
Perfect.
Oh my gosh, look at these climb gradients, man. Oh, that's brutal. What's the climb gradient off of runway 7? Or even runway 25?
580.
Look at the 25. It's ridiculous.
815 times that by,
that's a serious climb gradient. But that's only to 9,200.
Yes,
but the one up to 12 grand, that's honking, man.
You're not taking the Lancer out of there.
No. Negatory.
VFR.
Yeah. So every 2 weeks we're going to be changing our bonus field. Right now the bonus field is Albuquerque, and the next one's going to be Eagle, and then the next one will be Reno, and that covers the first 6 weeks of operation.
Yeah.
So we cover our primary fields, and we have our one bonus field.
It was entertaining. I was watching the stream of Marcus MMC, and he said, "You guys are going to be really excited about our next field. I can't say what it is. It's not publicly announced." And in the chat, I immediately went, "It's either Eagle or Oakland." And it was pure guess. And
nice.
I loved seeing his poker face as he tried to say, "Well, it could be that, or it could be that, or it could be that." And so when you guys put it on the site, I was like, "Yes, I had a
nice
shot in the dark." So
that's nice.
Looking forward.
I've never flown out of Eagle.
I haven't either.
I'm looking forward to it.
Anyway. All right. Well,
Nice.
I hope that we can do this again for other, whether it be departures or arrivals or just general, Pilotedge debriefs. I hope that we can do it again. I think people will enjoy the content, and I just want to say, on behalf of all of us that are flying the expansion, well done. Thank you for pulling that trigger and making it a lot more exciting there, a lot more variety available to us pilots.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. We are sincerely excited about it. I'm personally stoked about it. I can't wait to fly in it. As soon as the scope settles down a little bit, I want to hit these fields just as much as you guys do. As much as ZLA does have just a ton of variety and procedures, people who've been customers for a long time have really hit so many of those fields now. We are looking for something a little bit different, and the weather of the Pacific Northwest and the geography of the Rockies will give us challenges for a long time to come. We saw that freezing fog. I think I saw indefinite ceiling 200, visibility quarter mile. RVR was down to about 2,000 and something at Salt Lake the other day with freezing fog. It was fantastic. You just do not see that at LA and Vegas. You never do. So between the terrain and the weather of the Pacific Northwest, Salt Lake, and the Rockies, there's going to be there's a lot of fun to be had.
Yeah, and I'm very excited to have Salt Lake City be one of your busier airports also.
Yeah,
because it's
exactly
my hometown.
Exactly.
All right, thanks, Keith. Appreciate your time.
All right, man. You got it.
Okay.